Charlie Albone, and welcome to episode 7 of season 2 of That's How We Grow in partnership with STIHL Garden Power Tools. If you've been enjoying the season so far, be sure to leave a rating and share the series with your friends who are passionate about gardening. On this episode, we're going to chat about designing a beautiful garden space around the great Australian backyard pool. Australians love to make a splash in their backyard, and for this, you need to consider the best ways to plant around your pool to have a great looking garden. It's no secret that in Australia, pools are a staple of many backyards. An estimated 3.3 million Australians have a pool in their back garden. But whether it's a pool or any other feature in your backyard, there are plenty of things to consider when planning your landscape. Anyone who has a pool will understand the work needed to keep the leaves and the dirt out. So planning an appropriate garden will prevent this work. I'll be joined today by one of Australia's leading garden and pool designers, Tristan Peirce. He's based in Perth and he loves designing a garden featuring an amazing pool. We're going to be discussing what needs to be considered when planning a garden around a swimming pool, some of our favourite plants to use around a pool, and how your garden can complement your swimming pool. The design and build of a pool can be a major project in itself, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Tristan on how we can make this as smooth as possible. The design and build of a pool can be a major project in itself, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Tristan how we can make this as smooth as possible. So get your togs on or find a comfy place to sunbathe, and let's jump into the deep end. My next guest is someone I'm really excited to introduce to you all. I have been following his work on Instagram for quite some time, and I'm really looking forward to putting a face and the voice to this amazing work. He's based in Western Australia, landscape architect Tristan Peirce. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. Nice to meet you.
You too. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do and how you got into landscape design and architecture?
We're a team of 2 landscape architects that design single residential landscapes and pools in Perth. I studied landscape architecture at university, and the reason I sort of went down that path was I always have had a passion for art and nature, and it was sort of seemed logical that the two went together, and and I was basically able myself to do that day in, day out and really enjoy it.
So Tristan, as I mentioned, your Instagram is so strong. You've got a real look to your landscape architecture. There's often a lot of curves in your swimming pools. There's a lot of greenery. How did you develop that? How did you develop your own look?
I think probably evolved over time, and the curves is definitely something that is often brought up by our clients, and it hasn't actually been that intentional. I suppose we just feel like it flows really well with the, being curved, and a lot of architecture is quite, naturally quite square in floor plan, and for us to be able to move into nature and introduce a few sort of gentle curves has been something that we've really enjoyed, and it's been valuable to be able to put forward our designs in 3D as well, so people can sort of see that. And on Instagram, that's largely what we present. We sort of present concepts and ideas, and to deliver them through 3D fly-throughs and 3D renders is a really powerful way to communicate.
If you were to describe your garden style, would you be able to put a label on it?
I think we at times get called contemporary. However, I'd hope to think that we have a quality of landscape that underpins what we do, and our style somewhat shifts and moves with the architecture as well as the client's kind of desires as to what kind of garden they like. We're sort of doing some of the architectural ones that we do, they call for a bit more of a rigid kind of structure to sort of relate to the architecture of the home. So, maybe contemporary.
I would say it was contemporary. However, you have such great success with your planting that it stops it from being an extension of architecture and a real celebration of the landscape.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes plants can be used to break it down a little bit and lap over the sort of the geometry of the design. So you do break the sort of circular or the more of a square line that with detail planting in the right areas.
So when you're designing for a client, what are the biggest constraints you have? Is it around construction principles, or is it around the client wanting certain things? Is it the soil, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there'll be definitely a number of things that are considered. There'll be council requirements, that there'll be likely a sewer easement that is on site where we need to avoid the proximity to that. There'll be coastal or environmental conditions. So if it's a project right on the coast in Perth, we need to adapt to that with our plant palette. And yeah, there's probably quite a lot, and there's also council and regulations and Australian standards that we sort of know pretty well. So we kind of do it naturally now, but there's certainly things that we would consider with every project.
So do you normally work with architects to get in on these projects, or do you work with people that are renovating, that sort of thing? Who's your sort of client base?
Yeah, we work with architects. We work with a broad range of people. There's a few builders that we consistently do projects for, and there's also the direct relationship, direct to client relationship. We definitely always like to maintain that, because we do feel that all of our projects are about people fundamentally and how they want to live. So to get to know them throughout our design process is really important. And even when we are, like I said, working with architects and builders, it really comes back to establishing a really good relationship with the client to understand what they really like in their project.
And what they're trying to achieve, and how they want to, I guess, use the space to change the way that they're living their lives at the moment, which is the nice thing about landscaping, isn't it? You really do make an impact on someone's just well-being. Absolutely.
And I think it's sort of, it's also done through architecture, and then, just it's really furthering that process. And in Australia, and in particular Perth, it's just becoming more the norm. And it's really important to sort of drag people outside and get them to appreciate nature and get away from technology to a degree, and communicate with people again.
You mentioned you're in Perth. That's a very different climate to so much of Australia. How do you find it gardening there and creating spaces in that climate?
Yeah, it's definitely different, but I suppose I've always grown up with it. So I'm quite accustomed to what our climate demands, and it's very dry, so very free draining soils. Eastern States is more of a clay soil, and we've got a very sandy soil. So the planting definitely, and soil preparation and retic, irrigation needs to be sufficient to sort of all come together to produce a successful garden.
Yes. Yeah, it's looking at it holistically, isn't it? You can't just expect to find a nice plant, put it in the ground and expect it to grow. You've got to do the soil preparation, you've got to have the irrigation, and you've got to understand what kind of maintenance you can give a space.
If push comes to shove on our project and the budget starts creeping up, we probably suggest to downscale the plants, but don't skimp on the soil prep and retic, because that's something you can't really do very well after the fact. So if you've got, it's like the foundations of projects, and getting that right is extremely important.
So how do you improve your very sandy soils? Is it organic matter and compost, or have you got any other tips and tricks?
We previously have done more of a sort of remove 100 mil and put 100 mil of organic soil conditioner in, but we've actually moved more towards a concentrate. So it actually requires less soil to be taken off site, and the high concentrate and is mixed in with the existing soil to improve it. Organic is extremely important because that remains in the soil. It's definitely been a bit of a game changer to get that right. Has definitely delivered really successful projects.
Yeah. Do you have problems with hydrophobia, where you just cannot get water into the soil?
Yeah. There's certain areas of Perth, mainly coastal, because it's a limestone sort of soil base, where you can actually just see it. You can actually put water on the soil, and it just actually beads like it does, on a painted surface. So it's quite amazing, actually.
It looks like mercury, doesn't it? Sort of on the soil.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. on your Instagram, you have some absolutely incredible looking projects. And as you mentioned, a lot of them do incorporate a swimming pool. Is that driven by the client, or is that something that you sort of push yourself?
I think it's probably naturally evolved. I really have an interest in pools, but I haven't really consciously gone about it that way. I definitely have an interest in the broader landscape and how connecting areas of the home, and if there's a dead spot in the garden, we introduce a space that is kind of like it attracts people to it. So pool is one of those items that will certainly attract people out there, and connecting the pool to the broader landscape and the home, and it is pretty much what we try to achieve.
So I know that gardening around a swimming pool can be quite messy sometimes. Do you have any tips and tricks for keeping leaves and debris out of a swimming pool?
Yeah, I think it would definitely be come down to a number of things. Plant selection would be something that really needs to be considered. We would also drop our soil levels around the paved surfaces that are adjacent to pools, so typically by about 50 mil. So if leaves and debris do fall, they'll remain within the garden beds and not spill over into the pool.
That's interesting that you say that. So then mulch will stay in the pool, and I guess any excess water that moves away from the pool, because you can't have groundwater moving into a pool, then collects in the garden beds, and it sort of doesn't wash back into the swimming pool. Well,
it's basically it's a really good one, actually. So if you have a few, you're naturally going to get leaf litter over time, and if it's sort of falling onto the pavement, it'll get hopefully get blown into the garden bed, or if it's falling into the garden bed, it doesn't actually overflow and come out and go into the pool.
Is there any time when you turn up and the client is desperate for a swimming pool, and it's just not the right situation? There's overhanging trees that, like a jacaranda, for example, which would be a nightmare around a swimming pool, and you just say you can't have one?
I think you need to be really honest, and we're pretty conscious of that. So if something's not going to work spatially, or if there's like you say, if there's a massive jacaranda there and it's going to over time really drive them nuts, we would certainly bring it up, and it's probably a responsibility of ours to make sure that we're being really considered like that, to make sure the clients are ending up with a product that they're hoping to end up with.
And that's one of the benefits of using a professional, I guess. They're not emotionally tied to the space, and they don't have ideas that are driving them from other sources. So I guess you can go in and tell them exactly how it is.
Exactly right. And we're selling we're not selling a product as such, so we're not selling a pool. So we just want to make sure that the clients get the right outcome. And if a pool isn't something that's going to work there'll be alternatives that we can discuss. Do
rollout covers help with keeping debris off water, or are they just a nuisance because you've got to roll them up and then they get all the leaves collected in the cover?
Yeah, they sort of work sort of temporarily to a degree in that respect. So you find that when you do take them off, the leaves do actually go into the pool. The benefit of them, though, would be in Perth, particularly about the water evaporation. So just reducing that, and also probably from a heating the pool perspective, they're quite good for that as well.
I think having involving a landscape designer in that process is a great way to understand exactly what you can and can't do in a garden space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're definitely going to achieve a much better result by having someone of that skill set involved. Just like anything you do, if there's a professional service that can assist you in getting that ultimate design, or whatever it might be, as a lawyer or a doctor, there's that skill set that you lean on when you need it, and it's not dissimilar with achieving a fantastic landscape.
Yeah, I think what people need to understand when they're involving a landscape designer as well is they don't have all the answers for you. They're there to help you create your own space and draw out exactly what you want from the space, but just make sure it's done properly so you don't end up with any mistakes at the end. Yeah,
and I think that's really important to make sure that the designer, it's their responsibility to listen to the client, and like I said a bit earlier, that make sure you understand the client and what they're after, and then use your professional skill set to deliver a project that they love, but is a little bit more than what they might have been able to achieve independently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people get scared off by plants, and that's where they lean on a landscape designer or landscape architect for that kind of information. I guess planting around a swimming pool can be quite tricky in so many ways, because you've got the water coming out of the pool, you've got the rainwater, the pool water is often got some chemicals in it. How do you pick plants around a swimming pool?
Yeah, I think probably through experience. There will definitely be a few plants that, unfortunately, we have used, I have used throughout my career, and they definitely have not survived with the level of chlorine around the pool. So we would make sure that they are a little bit tolerant of those conditions. And also the other thing would be worth thinking about how these plants are going to be maintained, and how you do that.
Yeah, so I guess when you're talking to the client, you have to understand the amount of maintenance they can give to a space, and realistically, are they going to have to get someone in to help them, and what plants do you put around the pool? Large conifer hedges or something that drops a lot of flowers or seeds or something might not be the best choice.
Yeah, and trees, what sort of tree you're putting around the pool, because if you put a fine leaf tree that drops its leaves into the pool, it can do a bit of damage, or it can be pretty not damaged. It just clogs up the filtration system. So you find yourself using trees that have a bigger leaf and hopefully drop less leaf litter.
What are your top trees for around a swimming pool?
Well, look, it's a bit of a cliche one, but the frangipani is very widely used because of the broader leaf, and I know it's a deciduous tree, but there's one that's an evergreen, but it's a deciduous tree, but at least it just drops once a year, so it's not a bad option. The other trees I like is the Tristan Peirce, which is a Canuka, so it's a PBR. So I don't know if you have it over there, but it's a great evergreen tree. It's a small or relatively small tree, and it's a great sort of option for residential projects.
Yeah, absolutely. We use the variety Luscious quite a lot, which has that lovely white trunk to it and black tips to the leaves, but really glossy evergreen, really good tree. So that is good for around a swimming pool. Yeah,
and it's interesting. Like, I've got them at my own house, and I think that's a great way to explore, if you're a designer, to explore trees that you put into projects yourself. And I've got a heap of plants, the tester plants in my verge that I test out and sort of observe how they grow. So, designing on a piece of paper and then putting them in the first day, everything looks great. You just want to make sure, in my opinion, that a landscape and a garden lasts a period of time. So it's always looking good going forward. So yeah, definitely one worth considering.
Yeah, they're a living, breathing thing, and yes, they're supposed to look good when they're finished, when all the workmen come off site. But in 2 years, they're supposed to look better than that, and then in 5 years, they're supposed to look even better. They're one of those things that just gets better with time, and that only comes from picking the right plants for the right spot. You don't want to be fighting these things, and you can get it wrong by putting big trees in small spaces and all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
we have got it wrong in the past, so and I think you have to accept that sometimes things don't work for some weird reason, and sometimes I never have found out. But obviously, rule of thumb, we would just know what is going to work, and just make sure it's not going to drive people nuts with root systems and or getting too big, like you say. It's definitely worth making sure you consider all of that.
Tristan, you mentioned you love getting out in the garden yourself and doing a bit of hedge trimming. I'm a huge fan of the STIHL battery stuff. Are you using battery, or are you still petrol?
Yeah, I definitely use the battery powered tools. It's a bit safer for me. I'm not, being a designer, I'm my hand in man is quite limited, but they're just so easy to use, and there's no cords. You can go anywhere, and they're just so convenient where you can just swap the battery over to the next piece of equipment to keep going.
I'm a huge fan of the fact you can press a button and it's turned on, and you remove that whole trying to start the engine. It's a great benefit to every gardener. When you're planning a swimming pool and there are, say, trees overhanging, something like that, do you try and reduce those trees back to keep them away from the water surface, or is it just something you have to live with?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely. I think, if you can sort of, balance it out with shade versus maintenance, so, it's always worthwhile. So if we need to sort of, get in there and take a bit out, there's some great sort of pole top trimmers that would be used to cut some branches back here and there.
When you're pruning a tree, you really need to, consider about obviously the benefits of reducing it back, but also take in the consideration the aesthetics of it as well. You don't want to have a lopsided tree, for example. So only reduce back, I guess, what you have to.
Absolutely, and always, horticulturists taught me once to trim it and then step right back and have a look at it, and then go back and do the next branch. So it's super important to do that so it doesn't look, it still looks quite natural, and obviously it done in best horticultural practices as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it does grow back, but it takes a long time to grow back. So it's much easier to take it slow, reduce it slowly, and like you said, just keep standing back and taking a look at it. Yeah, when it comes to planting up, I noticed on a lot of your jobs, and we've mentioned it, about using the pool wall as the fence, and you almost have like a moat of planting around the pool. That would obviously get quite a lot of splash from when kids and people jump in the pool and stuff like that. But the planting has to stay low, so you can't climb on it to make it compliant with pool fencing regulations. What sort of low plants do really well in those kind of chlorine-y type situations?
Yeah, we've probably used a few lamandras in the past, so they seem to cope really well. Obviously, it's extremely important to not have any plants that ever become climbable. So you're spot on with that. We don't do as many. We don't do many overflow pools. We actually have pools that have got an edge to them, and they also have a capping, so the water doesn't come out as much as possible. But yes, it's things like dianellas and lamandras that will be commonly used for trenches. If we've got a bit of shade, we'll use something like the philodendron xanadu. That's quite actually works brilliantly actually. So, but if it's in Perth, if it gets too sunny a spot, it'll tend to get a little bit burnt. Yeah,
it's pretty bulletproof, the xanadu, isn't it? You can use it in so many locations.
Definitely.
We mentioned that a lot of the water is got chlorine in it. Do you ever put in magnesium pools or sort of freshwater pools, anything like that?
We do probably often use ozone, which is a lower level of chlorine for the pools, and people and the naked pool system. So there's definitely a few ins and outs. We also make sure that we work with a pool builder to also listen to them and what their preference is, because they often have their preferred option, and we sort of understand that and collaborate with them. So we don't sort of profess to know all about that sort of thing, but the naked pool system has been something we've used for a long time. Less chlorine, people really like it. Get out with less chlorine on them, and we're just actually delving into. We just started the design of our first natural/living pool. So that's something that I've seen quite popular over East, and it hasn't been a great deal of it in Perth, but it's really exciting to sort of do something a little bit different.
Yeah, they are really exciting, aren't they? I mean, they use them in Europe. They've used them for ages, where it's basically two swimming pools, isn't it? One that you swim in, then that water gets pumped into the second pool and going through natural reed beds before it gets pumped back into the big pool. So it's like swimming in a freshwater lake almost. Yeah,
I mean, it kind of makes a lot of sense, really. And obviously, I dare say it's a lot more environmentally friendly. So, it's something that we would like to develop our skills in that area and hopefully take that forward.
Yeah, the downside is the space, needing two pools and obviously the costs involved with those. But yeah, I think it's going to be seen a lot more moving forward. But we've spoken quite a bit about swimming pools. How do you incorporate a swimming pool into a garden, without it taking over and the space still feeling like a sort of sanctuary, getaway, green area.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important to do that, and also to give it enough breathing room around the pool, sort of just so you can have a lush backdrop to it. So I think we try to link it visually. So or when you're mud mapping it, we design in 3D. We go straight into 3D when we design, but I also would really think about how you can view the different activation areas from each individual space and link them together and get those proportions right, so you don't have one massive alfresco and a small pool, or vice versa. You want to make sure each area is livable. We place furniture within, indicative furniture within these spaces. People, we've got little blocks that we place into our models, our 3D models, so we can kind of gauge how these spaces are going to feel. So it's largely about proportion and, it's a little bit innate. I think that's definitely something that I've got quite naturally. But, you always develop these things and, when you walk out in a space that's being constructed, you sort of feel how that space is going to work, and it's probably something that you train. So it's largely proportions, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess that comes with experience, doesn't it? You can draw something, but until you see it built and move around the space, you don't really get to feel it. So, but do you ever design for maintenance of a garden, or is it just aesthetics?
Oh, absolutely. I think maintenance is really important. It's a balancing act, as I'm sure you know, to make sure that the garden is relatively easily maintained, but also is looking the part or looking how the client would like it to look. So we would actually use a lot of border hedges, and the word hedges sometimes freaks people out a little bit, but when I say hedges, I probably mean a green screen, something like, I don't know if you have viburnum suspensum over there, but that's probably one of my favourite plants, and it's a bit of a loose kind of hedge. So when you do maintain it, you have your sort of trimming wand, and I'll probably do it at our house about once every 6 to 8 weeks. So it's actually not as hard as people might think. So we definitely have that as a backdrop, and then probably we would clump some plants sort of like together, so they've kind of got similar hydrozones and similar maintenance sort of requirements.
Yeah, so by doing that, you limit the amount of maintenance that's needed, and you've got more time enjoying the space. Yeah, absolutely. With hedging, it's interesting you say that it's more of a green screen. Most people think of that tightly clipped, formal, almost European look with a hedge, but they can be lovely, loose green backdrops. And with that, I guess you get more flowering, you get better bird life in there. And you get a softer look, don't you? Absolutely.
No, I prefer it. I think that it still looks structured, but it's just a slightly more relaxed kind of setting. Look, and I think that's just a matter of opinion. I don't think everybody would necessarily share that opinion, but it's sort of something that I probably prefer to see in our gardens.
Is there anything you see in the sort of landscape design industry that's really coming forward at the moment? By that, I don't like to ask the question, what sort of trends do you see coming up? Because I think it's all about what the client wants. But is there anything that you've noticed with your clients that is a theme that's running through that people really like to see in their gardens?
I think something that I've observed, or when we're sort of working towards, is probably bringing some more native plants into our plant palette, as well as drought tolerant plants. There's quite a few exotic plants that are actually quite drought tolerant. So I think that's we're trying to mix our planting palette up a little bit more to sort of to be a bit more environmentally responsible, and still have a great garden, and it's a bit of an education kind of thing for ourselves and clients to move towards being a bit more environmentally sustainable. So the plant palette is certainly one that is continually evolving.
Do most of your clients do the maintenance themselves, or does your firm do that, or do you use a subcontractor to do that?
We're just landscape architects, so it's myself and another landscape architect that work together. So we pair up with. We've got there's a horticulturist that I used to work with that maintains a lot of our clients' gardens. There's a few that do it themselves, but the large contingent of our clients are pretty busy people, so they definitely get the assistance of a landscape maintenance consultant.
I think when you're working around a pool, especially, if you're uncomfortable using a long-handled hedge trimmer or a battery-powered hedge trimmer, if you're uncomfortable with it, then yes, get a professional in to help you. But I find with a lot of my clients, they let us do that sort of stuff, but then they want to do the pottering around, a little bit of weeding, a little bit of pruning, that sort of stuff, so they feel connected. Yeah,
and I think that's really nice, for people to own the garden and the kind of, you sort of, I've learnt over time, having a bit of a commercial background as well, where people, ownership of spaces is really important. So if you can give them a hand with the fertilising or the horticultural side of things and leave a little bit to them, I think you'll find that the garden over time they'll love it, and it'll do really well. Yeah,
absolutely. An interesting one when you're, sorry to keep going back to pools, but when you're picking a colour for a pool, the colour of the water can really impact on the space. And it's quite strange, isn't it? Using a light tile will give you sort of a bluey kind of colour. How do you work the colour of the pool water into your designs, and how do you sort of explain that to your clients on how that works?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and I'm continually surprised by how much different a tile looks in and out of the water. So probably some past projects is really useful to show people, that kind of glacier blue that you get from a white tile. And obviously the 3D rendering software we have, we can change that with a few clicks of the button. So we're fortunate enough to be able to show clients how it looks, and then also at different times of the day with different lights and cloud cover and sun, it's amazingly different. So we probably, I think we select them a little bit on client preference, but if we have there's one we're doing that which is on the Swan River, and it's an infinity edge pool. So what we're trying to achieve with that one is blending that into the colour of the river, and so as you look out over it, it seamlessly kind of connects to the river. So we're using we're hoping to use a really dark tile for that project, so we can actually kind of start to nestle the pool into the broader river. So it's you don't get the opportunity very often to do that in Perth. So we're hoping that's how that one will go forward.
Yeah, nice reflective sort of quality to the water is always a nice touch. It sounds like you've worked on some pretty spectacular landscapes and gardens. Do you have a favourite?
I think, yes and no. I've got a few that I love going back to because the clients, they pretty much trusted us to be professionals and get the outcome that we needed. So there was a little bit of, hey, this is what we want, and there was hands off the wheel. So there's a couple I go back to. We end up pretty much, really luckily friends with a lot of our clients, and they've had us back for barbecues and so forth with our families, which is really, really nice. There's definitely a couple that I'll go back to, and it's sort of somewhat about the garden, somewhat about the friendship that you form, which makes it really, really nice to go back to.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of the job, isn't it?
Totally.
You mentioned that you grow things in your verge to kind of trial them before you put them into a landscape. With your own garden, is that do you just do that on the verge, or do you find yourself tinkering in the main garden and replacing things? And how does your own garden work?
Our garden is probably, I did it 10 years ago, so it's actually quite green on green, and it was probably where I was at that time. So there's lots of viburnum and Maria and star jasmine and Miss Muffets and citrus. I love citrus as a tree. So that was probably and once it's in, it's and mature, it's in. But it's given us a great deal of sort of privacy and greenery from the windows. So I think it would be interesting. The next garden that I do for us would be likely to be quite a bit more mixed up. So our verge is quite sort of mixed up because I'm trialling a lot of stuff, but it's still composed. But yeah, the broader garden's a bit more like layers of green on green, really.
Sounds like a lot of clipping. Do you get out there yourself and prune? Or
yeah, I do. Look, I do it a bit, but it's actually not. Like I said, it's not as much as people might think, and it depends on how clipped you want it. So, I've just got, a battery operated wand, and that comes out, and it's actually, and because I'm talking to people and working quite a lot, it's really nice to be able to get out and mow the lawn, and I really enjoy sort of doing the gardening because it just gives me a bit of a bit of quiet time to sort of just have a bit of downtime.
Absolutely, and battery power is a real game changer for people taking on their own gardens. If it comes to hedging, to mowing lawns, all that sort of stuff, it makes the quiet time even more quiet. It makes it a really enjoyable process.
And it's so convenient, just having those sets of battery powered tools where you can just swap it straight in, straight out, and the technology these days is so good for those kind of. And you've got the skins that you can just grab them and off you go.
Yeah, it's nice to see everything's moving a bit more environmentally friendly, from tools all the way through to swimming pools.
Absolutely.
Well, Tristan, it has been great talking to you. Absolutely fantastic. It's nice to put a face to the Instagram that I pore over most evenings and look at your landscape. I really love the work you do. So keep it up, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Nice to meet you too.
So now it is time for me to answer some of your community questions. And Kelly from the Gold Coast asks, Charlie, I love listening to the first season of your podcast. Well, thank you, no question, but I do like when you say things like that. And we have a lawn near our pool with a line of pavers bordering them. When cutting the grass, some trimmings regularly get blown into the pool. Well, let me tell you what my mum did for me in 2016 at the Chelsea Flower Show. I had a sunken lawn, and around the outside was a water rill. And my mum got on her hands and knees in the pouring rain and used a pair of scissors to keep all the edges nice and straight. Now, I don't suggest you do it with scissors, but if you do use some hand shears, that is a great way to cut the edge without it blowing into the swimming pool. Jodie from Perth has emailed and asked, Hi Charlie, I recently moved from Sydney to Perth, and I've noticed the soil in my garden is very different. From heavy soil in Sydney, my new home is very sandy. Do I have any tips on how I should look after the soil, particularly for my veggie patch? Well, let me tell you, the soil in Perth is generally pretty terrible. It's very, very sandy. So incorporating lots of organic matter and lots of compost is a good way to improve the structure. But you need to be aware that it doesn't become hydrophobic, which is where it cannot accept water. If that happens, you need to add a wetting agent. You can spray that on or use a granule. For your veggie patch, you want to be adding lots and lots of organic matter, and cow manure is the best thing you can add to a veggie patch. Make sure it's well rotted and you should have a great harvest. Do you have a gardening question you'd like me to answer? Well, send an email to charlie@stihl.com.au and I'll try and answer them in 2 weeks, which will be our last episode. It was great to discuss designing a garden around water with Tristan. And there's a lot more that needs to be considered than many people realise. So if you're thinking of making the plunge and installing a pool, or you want to refresh your garden around a pool, I think the biggest tip is talk to a qualified landscape designer. They're going to help you maximise the full potential of your garden. You need to consider what type of water the pool will have and the impact it's going to have on the surrounding garden. And it's great to hear there's a movement towards natural swimming pools. We also spoke about the amazing selection of plants you can have around your swimming pool to maximise your green whilst minimising your maintenance. Well, thanks for listening to That's How We Grow in partnership with STIHL Garden Power Tools. Do you need the tools to take on any garden challenge? Go to the STIHL website or head to your local STIHL dealer today. There are over 600 STIHL dealers across Australia, and you can easily find your local dealer on the STIHL website. Don't forget to check out STIHL's blog with plenty of great gardening advice, as well as many of my key seasonal tips and tricks. Be sure to go to blog.stihl.com.au. Our next episode will be a bumper edition. My special guest will be the incredible garden designer, Paul Bangay. Paul is an amazing garden designer, and I can't wait to pick his brain on anything and everything to do with this. His incredible garden Stonefields in central Victoria is amazing. I can't wait to chat with Paul, and this episode will drop in 2 weeks.